to progress the UN Sustainable Development Goals relating to peace and justice. Mina, thank you so much for joining us today. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much for having me here today. I want to thank the organizing committee of the 2023 Women's Empowerment Expo and my good friend and colleague from Mediators Beyond Borders, Dr. Estera Borska, for inviting me here today. I will start by saying that all people who inhabit this planet are peace builders. Naturally, we have a humane tendency towards peace, and yet we live in conflict. So I'm going to start with a couple of questions to the audience. What does peace mean to you? Just go out and say it. What does peace mean to you? How would you define peace? Anyone? Strong communities, yes, absolutely. Equality? Mm-hmm. A society that values women, yeah.
Voice for marginalized communities.
Voice for marginalized communities.
The absence of injustice.
The absence of injustice.
And of conflict.
And of conflict.
Mutual respect.
Mutual respect, absolutely. Opportunity. Wonderful. Thank you for all of these contributions. So we aim for these objectives in our lives. It's a natural tendency. How do you think peace is attained and sustained? You talked a little bit about these principles that we talked about regarding equality, respect for voices, respect for inclusion. Would it surprise you that only 13% of negotiators, 6% of mediators, and 6% of signatories for major peace processes around the world are women? It is a stark contrast to the contributions that we can make around the world. So peace is sustained by two factors. One is what we call negative peace. Negative peace is the absence of war. But many of us peace builders prefer to focus on what's called positive peace. And positive peace are attitudes, institutions, and structures that exist naturally in peaceful societies. And what do you think happens in peaceful societies? I feel like I'm lecturing a little bit here because I'm in a lecture hall. But what do you think happens in peaceful societies?
Shared processes for dealing with conflicts.
Shared processes for dealing with conflict. What else?
Compromise and compassion.
Compromise and compassion.
Women's voice at a table of negotiation.
Women's voice at the table of negotiation. What about the Sustainable Development Goals? What about the elimination of poverty? What about the advancement of women's rights? What about climate change? These are more likely to be achievable in areas of the world where there's positive peace. And so let me give you an idea of some countries that have the most positive peace indicators as established by the Institute of Economics and Peace in 2020. Sweden, Denmark, Finland, Norway. Canada was 7th. United States was 24th. Who can guess who are the least peaceful countries? Sorry? Colombia wasn't in the least 5. I'm just going to list the least 5. I'm sure it's down there, though. Afghanistan, Yemen, South Sudan, Somalia, Afghanistan, and Syria. So when we're talking about pillars of peace, peace, we can recognize that women's contribution to peace is absolutely critical. And I'm going to talk a little bit about UN Resolution 1325 in a moment. But I do want to talk about some of the pillars of peace that societies can try to involve more women in. And the first is a well-functioning government. 22% of 193 countries have a woman as head of state, and 13% of countries have a gendered balanced cabinet. So already women are underrepresented in one of the pillars of peace. The second pillar of peace, and I'm only going to talk about a couple of them, but there are 8, is acceptance of human rights. And we have seen an erosion of some women's rights around the world, including in the United States with the overturning of Roe versus Wade. Sound business environment. We need more women as CEOs, as board members, and as leaders of corporations and the private sector. Free flow of information. We have seen in some countries where freedom of expression is curbed, and especially towards women. And those are just a couple of the 8 pillars of positive peace. So why do we work so hard for women's inclusion in peace processes? Well, the United Nations recognized the importance of women's inclusion in peace and security when they adopted UN Security Resolution 1325. And according to the U.S. Institute of Peace, the WPS, as it's known as, affirms that peace and security are more sustainable when those who identify as women are equal partners in the prevention of conflict, the delivery of relief, and building positive peace. Now, that was 23 years ago when it was resolved as a resolution. And when we talk about what we do as peace builders, we talk about participation, women's participation in peace-building processes. We talk about protection against gender-based violence, which is absolutely critical when we're talking about women's inclusion. We have seen, and there's a lot of great research and literature, if you want to Google it or access it, on violence towards women who seek public office. So I encourage you to do a little more research on that. Building peaceful structures in women's rights and relief and recovery. So that just kind of gives you kind of a very brief overview of what we do as women peace builders around the world, and why it's so important for women's empowerment. When we talk about some of your focuses this year, I note global leadership, women's voice, women in sports, health and sustainable communities, all of which contribute to positive peace. So thank you for having me, and I look forward to the rest of the program.
Thank you so much, Mina. That was wonderful. She gave us an insightful overview of global peace, security, and mediation, all benefiting from women's leadership. We really appreciate you coming and joining us today. Now I'd like to introduce Dr. Staroborska, who will introduce the next part of today's program. Dr. Staroborska is passionate about peace building on a global level, international law, empowering women, and breaking generational curses in children impacted by complex trauma. Dr. Borska earned her doctoral degree from California Baptist University and focused her dissertation on global diplomacy. She built a diplomacy training program called Peace Unleashed, and it's based in neuroscience for United Nations member states to help diplomats overcome barriers to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Estera, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ariette. Good morning, everyone. My name is Dr. Estera Borska, and I'm a member of the Harvard Global We Connect team. What a great message from our keynote speaker, Meena Vaish, who is a personal friend of mine and a colleague. She's doing some amazing work for women's rights globally. Can we give her another hand? Great. All right. And can we give a round of applause for our theme today of women's voice? Are women's voices important? Absolutely, right? Can you turn to your neighbor and tell them your voice matters? That's right. Okay, you all matter, and women's voice matter, and that's why we're here today. That's exciting, right? All right, so we're getting excited because we're going to have our women's panel here first in a moment, and I'll invite our speakers up. But before we begin our programming, I would like to remind our attendees and viewers that Harvard Alumni for Global Women's Empowerment seeks to raise awareness and provide education about different cultural approaches to promotion and freedom of women's rights. We do not advocate for specific ideology or political and cultural agenda. Rather, we explore various issues and topics to the importance of our global membership and women worldwide, the diversity and backgrounds of our membership is really important to us, and so the views expressed during our events are solely those of our speakers and participating audience and do not imply endorsement of Harvard GlobalWe. So that's just a statement I have to give, but we're all excited here and all believe in the importance of women's voice, and especially in the aspect of human rights. So I'm delighted to introduce the next part of our program. It's going to be a panel on women's voice with the importance of mentorship, and the title of this panel is called Empowering the Voice of Women, Local to Global. So without further ado, I'll invite our speakers to come up and take a seat, and we'll start our panel. All right. So we will start with some brief, actually, I've been told to use the mic, I'm sorry. Here we go. Can you all hear me well? Awesome. Okay. So we'll start with brief introductions of each of our panel members and the amazing work they do locally and globally to unmute the voices of women and empower their voice. So we can start with Mar Rosati from Proyecto Florecer, who is the executive director.
Good morning. I'm Mar Rosati. I'm representing Proyecto Florecer. We work in Medellin, Colombia, with Venezuelan and Colombian women to break cycles of poverty and create generational change. So why do I do this work? When I was 15, which was the same year that I ran away to California and spent most of the year homeless, my high school guidance counselor felt inspired to yell at me that my brother was going to go to Penn State and I would end up in State Penn. So, hello from Harvard.
Touche. Yes.
That, I would never have survived that year without the help and mentorship of people who recognized something in me and lent me a hand, created opportunities for me, and inspired me to be my best self. One of the people who inspires me today is 20 years younger than me. She's my co-founder at Proyecto Florecer, and she's with us virtually. Her name is Erin Colton Enberg. And we met 6 years ago at a women's circle in Medellin where we were working on ourselves. She had come to Colombia to be an English teacher at public schools, and she recognized a great lack of alternative education for young women there. There were issues with self-esteem, with early pregnancy, with toxic relationships. And she was determined to create some kind of program, an educational program for young women. And she approached me and said something to the effect of, hey, you've been some big muckety-muck in business. Can you help me turn this into something? And so that was 3 years ago, and I couldn't be more inspired by her commitment to the women of Medellin, and she helps me be my best person, and that's why we do the work we do.
Wow, so powerful. Thank you, Mar. So next we'll go to Girls Give Back, Selma Murphy, who is the founder and leader of Girls Give Back.
Okay. Hello, my name is Salma Murphy, and I'm the founder and leader of Girls Give Back Global. And I founded Girls Give Back in 2020 in kind of a state of not knowing what to do and feeling unheard. And so I thought that, there has to be other girls, at least in Boston, who feel this way as well. And so I reached out to a couple of friends, and I was like, what do you think about this idea? What do you think about Girls Give Back? What if we just did one project in Boston and tried our best to make some type of change, just one project, and see how it goes? And it ended up becoming a really incredible community of young women just in Boston. And we started doing little things, the little things like community conversations. We did campaigns on our Instagram. We did women's health drives, things like that. And it ended up growing and expanding. We started in Tampa, Florida, and then Miami, and then Austin, Texas, San Diego, California. And then we ended up going global. So our first global chapter was in Morocco. And thank you to my mom for helping me with that one, helping me get started with that one. But we started in Morocco, and I started to see that this need for wanting to have your voice heard and create change in your community for these young girls was a real thing, and we didn't have a platform to do that. So I found that these girls had a voice and had a space to feel that way in Girls Give Back. And so from there, we started going from Rabat, Morocco. We went to Shanghai, China, Beirut, Lebanon. We went to Kampala, Uganda, which is one of our biggest chapters right now. We went to Montevideo, Uruguay, and so on and so forth. But we do work across the world to connect girls globally, but also to have women give girls a space to create change in their communities however they see best fit, and to have no one else tell them what to do and just do what they think is best for their community and themselves.
Wow, that's amazing, right? Never doubt the voice of one woman who is willing to make a difference, right? That's amazing. Thank you, Selma. Okay, so next we'll go to Big Sister Boston, Anissa Sabi, the president and CEO.
Thank you very much, and thank you everyone for being here this morning in person and virtually. I am the new CEO of Big Sister of Greater Boston, really grateful for the opportunity to serve in this capacity and to work with a team that is focused on serving girls in the Greater Boston area from ages 7 to 24. We are a mentoring program and so much more, and really looking for ways every day to elevate the voices of the young women and girls that we work with as mentees, and certainly partnering with our mentors, our volunteers, our women who step up every day to help in this work. Prior to being with Big Sister, I was on the Boston City Council, and prior to that, I was a high school teacher in Boston. And what sort of brought me here through lots of different channels was really my dad. And as an Arab, as an immigrant to this country, saying to me that politics and government and leading wasn't really, truly possible for me. And I think we sometimes need to step into these places and into these voids. And I'm grateful for that motivation he gave me, because Arab girls know that they should do exactly what their father says not to do and step into those spaces. But I am grateful for the opportunity throughout my career, my multiple careers, that I've been able to use those spaces to elevate the voices of others, and in particular this work and what we'll talk about today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Anissa. That's right. We don't listen to our fathers, but the newest generation actually empowers women, right? We have tons of men allies, and hopefully the next generation gets a better view at how women act as leaders and how wonderful we are, right? Can we get a round of applause for that? Yes. We need more women leaders. Thank you, Anissa. Okay, so we'll start with our first question for our panel members. How do women mute themselves? How does intergenerational trauma impact women using their voice? And how can we empower them to use their voice? So this is for all of you. Anyone who can go first, whoever would like.
Let's get started here. For women, we often let the men speak first. And it's partly because we don't trust our instinct, we don't trust our own voice, we don't trust the work that we've done to get to this point. And I say this both with my personal experience, reflected just a moment ago on my dad, but also as a mother of 4 teenage boys. we often doubt ourselves, and I see this today in my role leading a nonprofit organization, and I saw this for sure in politics and in government. There's a study that was done many years ago that still unfortunately holds true, that women are asked 7 times to run for office before they say yes, as opposed to their male counterparts who just do it. Because we are often, as women, waiting to be more prepared, to be more skilled, to receive additional education, when in fact it's our experiences that inform us and actually make us more equipped to lead. So we do it to ourselves too often, and we need to create opportunities for ourselves to speak up, but also for other women to speak up, and that's our responsibility for each other.
Thank you, Anissa.
I think I want to direct my attention towards the third question about how can we give access to women empowering their voices. And I think it's acknowledging and honoring women's ideas, especially women of color and low-income women across the world. I'm thinking first and foremost about Boston, just of myself and of my peers who had these amazing ideas but had nowhere to put them and no one to listen to them. And I think even further into Morocco and into India in particular, these girls who had such incredible ideas on how to empower and grow their own communities, and they didn't have a space to do that, and they didn't have a way to do it, and they thought, this is just an idea that is not realistic and that we can't really carry out. So I think having a way to really concretize those ideas and have a platform to get them done is how we're going to get women to really use their voices in a way that's impactful in our own communities.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah, thank you so much for that, Selma. I definitely agree. Part of my dissertation work for my oral defense, I had these images up of different marginalized communities all over the world, and it was really interesting because I asked my panel, my oral defense panel, can you identify what part of the world that was? And they really couldn't. And some of them were in the U.S., different parts of Africa, everywhere in the world. And so it just shows that there's marginalized communities everywhere, and the more that we amplify those voices that are forgotten, that are dealing with human rights violations every day, the ones that are left behind is where it's important. So thank you so much for that emphasis, Selma. Mar, would you like to answer this question as well?
Thank you. The families that we work with in Colombia, for the most part, don't necessarily have a father figure in the home, but what they do have is multi-generational women. There's daughters, there's mothers, there's grandmothers, and in many cases also great-grandmothers in the same home. So we run into a lot of intergenerational conflict. And one thing that is consistent is we see the women asking permission to speak, waiting for somebody from the outside to give them permission to express their voice. And a lot of this comes from the generations that came before them that believed that this was the way. And so what we try to work with multi-generations at once because they bring it back to the family, and then the changes get reflected within the family rather than just one person trying to fight against the entire family structure. And one thing that becomes consistent in the education programs that we're bringing to the families we work with is about personal growth comes from within, and we speak from what's within our heart without having to ask for permission, and then we give that permission to everyone around us.
Yeah, that's such an amazing point. And so thank you for highlighting on the aspect of the intergenerational trauma. And so my next question is connected to this question about the impact of collective trauma and how it plays a role in women's voice.
I'll start with that because we do come from decades of violence in Colombia. And what we see is a lot of fear that's created, that's pushed down from one generation to the next. And this isn't just necessarily from war and from drug violence. This is also just from gender violence, from abuse, where if a great-grandmother has been abused by somebody in her family, she pushes that fear of men down to her children. And we see it trickle down through the generations, and whereas young girls who may have no reason to fear her big brother might be raised to believe that her big brother is a threat to her. So we definitely see the impact of intergenerational and cultural trauma reflected in the way we address each other.
Yeah, that's a really good point. You know, this aspect of collective trauma is really important to address when discussing women's rights, women's human rights violations, and the way that we approach things from the higher up, from leadership all the way down at the community level advocacy. As advocates and as allies, it's really important for us to think about, because what does trauma do? Trauma exceeds our worldview, and so we don't see far for ourselves, right? Like Mar was saying, someone made a comment that could have, retracted her life, and it would have been like, the vocal point of your life, but how wonderful that you absolutely were like, hello from Harvard, right? That's what we need to do, right, is to push back on those things and really understand trauma and how it impacts the voice of women. So thank you.
Can I just add
please.
to that response, because I think it's really important, the work that so many of us do in that space in response to and mitigating the challenges of trauma and collective trauma, but also remembering those that do this work are dealing with their own personal trauma. You come to it every day with yourself, but also the secondary trauma that you feel being involved in this work. I saw it as a classroom teacher. You bring home what your students, what your kids are struggling with, what their families are dealing with, what the community is impacted by, if you aren't also already a part of that community. And we see it in our work at Big Sister. Our staff who are working day in and day out supporting our littles, our bigs, our little sisters, our big sisters, our families, the impact of what's happening in their communities across the area. We feel that, and I think it's really important in our work as we're looking to solve for that or mitigate for that trauma, that we're also taking care of ourselves. And it's a little bit different than self-care. It's really acknowledging that secondary trauma exists, and it can have very negative impacts on those that are showing up to work every day.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that point, Anissa. I think it really speaks to being good stewards of our mental health, right? And I think as service professionals, as advocates, as people who care about women empowerment and marginalized communities in general, it's really important to be good stewards of our mental health and really acknowledge, what reflective practices we pick up to make sure that we're well enough to help others as well. Do you have anything to add, Selma?
Yeah, just off of Anissa's point, of being understanding where we're coming from and where the people we work with are coming from. I'm thinking about a very specific example that I want to share that it took me back, and I remember telling you a little bit about it.
Yes.
I was working with a young girl in Vietnam, and we had these crazy ideas for a huge project to do in Vietnam where the girls would all come to Ho Chi Minh City and they would all do a huge women's drive, and then they do like a protest sort of thing in Ho Chi Minh City. And I remember her telling me to stay back on the Zoom and her saying like, I can't do that. Like there's no way I could go out there and like show my face as a woman, and like my dad and my brother would they would not let me do that, and I'd be in so much trouble. And so that kind of made me take a step back and say, wait, there's different communities and different traumas that exist across the world that I don't understand. And so I gave her that space, and we found ways to work around that. So, how could you sort of lead or be a part of this project without having to go out and do that? And so for me, I took that and I took it across all the chapters and thought to myself, how can I be more responsive and more caring towards these girls? Because I won't ever understand that, but I wanted to give her that space. So that's what I think.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. That's important, right? To allow, that's the way that we unmute women's voices, right? By giving them the space to do it themselves and allowing them the process and time it takes. Because, one of the things that we brought up through trauma in our conversations and planning for this panel is this aspect of cultural toxicity, right? We celebrate culture and we talk about all the beautiful things about culture, but can we all agree that there's some toxic things in our culture too? Right? And so how we speak up in our own families and how we show up for the women that we serve is very important, right? And how we say, that's not an appropriate comment, right? How we fight a part of cultural toxicity is definitely a puzzle piece of women empowerment, right? The more that we fight back those views is really important. So thank you, ladies. Okay, so let's move to the next question. What role do women play in gearing the next generation of women? Yeah.
I'll start. As a mother, with my daughter here in the audience, I love this question because we play a role as leaders. One thing that I've seen in my lifetime is that we as women get to learn the difference between the distinction between equality and sameness. When we approach leadership from the same perspective as men approach leadership, that doesn't necessarily work. Women need to lead differently than men. We may be equal to them, but we need to do it differently. We need to approach our sex lives differently than men, although we may be equal. And this is the kind of thing that as we bring up the next generation, the more we women become truly empowered, not like defensively empowered, but truly empowered and comfortable in our own leadership and our own selves, we can teach these skills to our daughters and to the next generations who come who come after us, and teach them to lean into their femininity, and teach them that the power of women is in instinct and intuition, and have them learn their own confidence in these things rather than being the reactive and militant feminine empowerment that was from my generation and the generation before me. That's what I see the role of women.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. Definitely highlighting just being good role models, right? Teaching women it's okay to show our femininity and compassion and the things that make us women. Awesome. Thank you, Mar.
I'll go next. I run a mentoring organization, and so I see this from two different perspectives. This is our work every single day. And our mentors, our big sisters, when they come into this space, it isn't about saving a young girl. It is about being a friend. It is about creating that safe space. It is about being a confidant. It's about being, I describe it as a cheerleader, because young women in particular don't often have people around them who can create those safe spaces. And it really is an effort that is too frequently overlooked as being critically important. It's not a heavy lift. And we're often faced with this desire, I think especially as women, to make extraordinary moves, to do something spectacular and amazing, and it has to be a big show, when it's actually those very small, tiny impacts that creating an hour's worth of space over a cup of coffee, or watching a movie together, or taking a walk, that actually makes the greatest impact. It's those little things that really make the greatest impact. I also look at this from my personal role as a mom of 4 boys. We're often very much focused, and I certainly am every single day in my day job, focused on the girls and on the women. But we also need to remember that the men are part of this equation too. And I'm excited about my own boys' future, that my teenage sons in particular were able to witness firsthand a woman in leadership, a woman in power, a woman stepping into her and using her voice. I think that that's a really important role that we as women play too, finding our allies as it relates to the men in the world and in our own personal worlds, but that we're also leading for them and with them and looking for them as allies in whatever it is that we do.
Should we move on? Okay, so.
I think Selma wants to answer.
Yeah, please. She nodded me no. I said, okay.
I was just going to say, for me, being, I think, a part of the next generation and working with girls who are part of the next generation, the biggest thing for me and for the girls that I've been working with has been seeing women in leadership, like Anissa. And so like seeing women in government, in city council, as mayor, has been one of those things where we look at it and we're like, we can do that. It is possible. And, we do have a space, especially when we see women of color in these spaces worldwide. It is inspiring, and it allows us to take a step towards that, whatever it might be, whether it's a small step, whether it's just campaigning for that person or having the courage to knock on a door or anything like that. But I lost my train of thought. Yeah, just seeing women in power is definitely a big thing. And I remember having Rachel Rowlands on our Girls Give Back conference and having some of the girls worldwide be like, oh my gosh, I love the DA. She's amazing. I've never heard a woman speak like this, so powerful. And they took that and they ran with that. And they were telling everyone about who DA Rowlands was and how someday they wanted to be just like her. So I think seeing that and being around that is super important.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, I think when we're thinking about the next generation, I think we forget at young age how impressionable young women really are and just young people in general. And so it's so important to be good role models and to really show strength in that way and to show how we can amplify voice. We can tell someone, we can talk about voice, we can have these panels, but unless we're modeling it to the next generation and the people in our circles, in our communities, it doesn't have as much impact, right? So that's our challenge, and as well as everyone else's, is to continue that work. So we touched a little bit on the toxicity of culture, but I do want to ask this question of our panel members, because I think it's really important. How can women navigate change within a family structure and challenge toxic culture that hold women back? I think we have a natural order here.
It's a challenge. It's a real challenge to challenge it within the family structure because there's a natural tendency to want to bring people back into the fold. And that's one of the reasons why at Proyecto Florecer we go out of our way to work with as much of the family as possible. Because when we can create the change within the family structure, it means that one person does not have to fight against the current. That's what I had to do in my personal situation, and it's really difficult. So giving the women the tools to create their own self of security and their own confidence in themselves goes a long way to helping break down those old ancient family structures. And really it's all about the negative narratives. If we can help them break through those negative narratives, which often sound like our mother's voice in our head, that helps them go back to the family and stand strong.
Want to answer that?
I don't know if I really have an answer for that because it is hard. It's like a constant, and it is for all of us a continual grind, and we find ourselves in sort of different spaces thinking about that question right now. It's funny because I was thinking about my mother's voice in particular, and when I decided to run for the city council the first time, certainly when I decided to run for mayor, my mother would ask me things like, and my mother is my biggest champion, my biggest cheerleader, would knock on all of those doors for me, no matter how much older she felt year after campaign. But she'd still ask questions like, what about the kids? What about the boys? Who's doing that? And I'm like, I've got a husband and he is capable. I've got a partner that is on board mostly, and just sort of standing firm. And I know that came both from my parents being champions of mine, although their realities were different than what my personal expectations were for my own life. But that's, still that caution and that hesitation from the people around me, that we as women in particular, but even our male allies need to be our constant champions, constant reminders. And as much success, and even in my mayoral loss, that was to me a great success, even through those successes, there are always those moments of great self-doubt. There are always those moments of hesitation, and we need to be each other's sort of that little elbow, that little nudge, that little extra momentum that keeps you moving in a particular direction.
Yeah, thank you, Anissa. That's really important. Selma, do you have anything to add? Okay. So we can move forward, but this is a really important question and a nice pause because, part of the work that Mina and I do at the UN, they have a program for human rights defenders that they built basically local community members all over the world to fight against human rights violations. And it's really interesting because one of the pillars that they do a lot of the education around training human rights defenders is around just cultural toxicity, around helping people to be educated around just the nuances of respect and what a human rights violation is, right? And so that's really important as we think about this panel and human rights work in our expo, just to think about how we can do that. And like Anissa said, it's very gradual, right? And it's an everyday process, and it feels like it's going uphill, but it's an important aspect of how it holds women back, and it holds a lot of marginalized communities back. And so it's really important to move forward. All right, so we'll move to the next question. We just have two left. We're almost through. But how does elevating women's voices impact men?
Women play such an important role in our society, whether it's the household, whether it's the community, whether it's in the workplace. We are central to every and any movement, whether we formally had power or not. If you look at where any major societal change has happened, it's often the women that are leading the way. And so we may not always get that acknowledgement for being in the forefront, but that we are central to movement. We are the bearers and raisers of children, but by extension, we're bearing and raising community and bearing and raising the world's biggest movements.
Well said.
So for this, I think of it, well, through Girls Give Back, at least, we had this thought, how can we involve men in this process, and how this is realistic, this is the real world. There's going to be men who are going to be working with and coming across, but also we want to impact communities that involve men as well. So what we did is we created an outreach and inclusivity team where we involved men in our process and having a way to be at the table together, even if it was a small table, just our little Girls Give Back table. We found a way to be together and have a way to negotiate and be okay, this doesn't work for me, but this works for you and this works for our community. And it came out to be a really good and what's the word I'm looking for? Productive team, and being able to see how we can work together on a bigger platform, even globally. And we tried to implement that globally, where we had men and women working together, whether that was through conversation or through actual projects, having women be the leaders of those projects and leading the men through what was supposed to happen. And we saw that first in Morocco when the girls did a Ramadan drive, actually, around this time last year, when they did a drive from one city to another, and they had the men moving a lot of the stuff with them to another place, but it was the girls saying, we're going to go here, here, and here, we're bringing this, this, and this. And it was really incredible to see how they were working together in a space where they usually don't. So I think it's really important to have women be leaders as well, but also have the men have a voice and have a way to work together and be at the table together.
Awesome, thank you. Mar?
I think it's so important how much emphasis is now being placed in the world on the empowerment of women and women's voices. I also think it must be a really difficult time to be a man right now. I think the generations that are coming up right now are kind of squeezed between, their grandfathers were the greatest generation, the fighters of World War II, and there were expectations of what it means to be a man. And now with all this women's empowerment, it's we're saying, we want you to be vulnerable, but man up. And you go to help us put our bag in the overhead compartment, and we're like, no, I got this. And so I have a lot of compassion for men right now. I don't know how you figure out how to be a man right now. My personal dream would be that a few years from now, we get invited back to be on this panel, but we're at the Human Empowerment Expo, where things have gone from one end of the pendulum, where women had no power and no voice, to now we're all focused on let's find our voice and let's do it powerfully, to why don't we just come back and swing equally in the middle?
Yeah, very well said, thank you. So we'll go to our last question that I think is a really important one, because when we talk about women's empowerment work globally, it can feel really astronomically big and feel like, what change can we make, right? So this question is really important. What are the micro changes that we can make, and how can we harness the power we already have to create more access?
Yeah, I can start with this one. So this speaks volumes to Girls Give Back because we value the smallest changes, and no matter what idea it is, if it's too big or too small, whatever the idea or the project is, we value it and we have a space for it. So, I mean, whether it's from community conversations to an Instagram campaign to a protest to a food drive to whatever it may be, we value it, and I've seen that the smaller changes have made the biggest impact, and I've seen the biggest changes within the chapters that have done smaller work. So we had a chapter in Tampa that did a mental health awareness campaign for young women in their district, and it actually blew up and became a really big thing within Tampa. And we saw women coming even anonymously to the platform to like share and just connect other women within Tampa. And so I think the smallest changes are the ones that, like I said, are going to make the biggest impact that we have to also value. Because like you said earlier, we have this this hope that we have huge projects and we make astronomical moves, but it doesn't always have to be like that. I think we have to value the very small things, and that's how we're going to also get young girls to get involved, because as a young girl, I can't organize things on my own, or as anyone can organize things on your own, but we have to value the small things and work together on that.
Awesome, thank you. Mara, Nisa.
I would just very quickly say that we do often become overwhelmed by this expectation that we have to do that astronomical, that extraordinary act. Just a small example, and I was thinking a little bit about this. It was sort of creeping in the back of my mind when I think about one of the efforts here around the old slide around women in sports. And I was a little bit of an athlete when I was younger, but I've got a group of friends that were all Division I basketball players. And they were women basketball players, but they were athletes. And we were at a local bar recently watching some of the March Madness games. There was like 6 TVs. So I said, I knew the bar owner, and I said, can we make one of these TVs dedicated to just the women's, I don't want this channel to switch off of WESPN. And shouldn't even have to ask, because women's sports is on point. And when even my own boys, who I had them watching college softball at a young age, appreciated sort of the level of competition, the level of excitement in women's sports, but we have to ask simply for the channel to be changed on one of the 6 TVs. And they're like, wow, this could actually be a place, this could be a bar where women come, who also drink beer, to watch a hoop game that they're interested in. So it's, I'd like all the TVs to go to that channel, but I want to watch a couple of the men's games too. Men's hoop is interesting.
We're going for the pendulum.
Men's hoop is interesting, but
TVs at a time.
But it's sort of that, this desire for a global shift, but what can we do today? And I can flip that channel on that TV today while we're working on sort of all of these bigger, far-reaching changes.
I bet there were some women in that sports bar who thought you were pretty cool, Anissa.
Oh, they're all my friends.
Oh, well, awesome. Even better. That's role modeling 101, ladies. Mar, do you have anything to add?
Sure. We focus at Project Florecer with the work we do on personal accountability, and if we want to see change, we have to create the change within ourselves. And so one micro change that I would invite everybody here to consider is back to the subject of permission about using your voice, is to become conscious of the little voice in your head that's stopping you from speaking. And when you feel that, I want to say something, but I'm not sure if I can, one thing that you can do is ask yourself, what would I say if I trusted my voice?
That was beautiful. Yeah, I love that. I will use that, Mar. That impacted me. Thank you so much. So we'll go to closing statements. If you ladies can give just a brief closing statement or anything that was your takeaway from our time together.
So, I love that idea of the concept of trusting your own voice and trusting the voice of the women that you surround yourself with, but also, and this comes from, I think, very much my time in government in particular, is also challenging each other's voices, making sure that, in acknowledging some of what happened, the conversation earlier today, your disclaimer, that we may not always agree simply because we are women. We are not a monolith. We have different opinions. We come from different experiences. We come from different places. And what we do share and the variety and diversity of our experiences and our background creates a much more dynamic conversation and can lead to much more better lasting change and improvement in our society. When we create those spaces, allow ourselves to speak, trust our words, avoid imposter syndrome at every opportunity you can, hold each other accountable to that, but also do not be afraid to challenge each other, to call out on each other when there is disagreement.
Awesome.
Yeah, so it's been a wonderful conversation, but what I want to kind of bring it back to is involving women's voices and acknowledging, especially young women's voices, not just in Boston or not just in the US, but across the world, and going out of our way to find those spaces, like finding things like Girls Give Back or like, how do you say it? Sorry? Project the Flores, and finding those spaces and being involved, no matter whether it's a donation, whether it's attending a meeting, whether it's just looking at the website, that's making change in some way or another. So we have to value little things like that as individuals and going and making that step ourselves, because it's not going to happen on our own or just like that. So.
Thank you. Go ahead, Mona.
I'd like to end with a reminder that we are all in this life together, and that we often approach life competing for resources from a scarcity perspective. We're all in this together, and making a change in this world doesn't necessarily have to mean starting a nonprofit or building a mentorship program. It could mean looking at the person next to you on the bus and saying, how can I support you today? And that's how we become more human, and that's how we become more balanced, and we become more empowered as a species together.
Wow, thank you. That was beautiful. My takeaway from this panel is one of my favorite quotes. Small hinges swing big doors. It's one of my favorite quotes, and I use it often, and it's because it's so important. Often we think that we can't do anything because we think of the multitude, but we need to remember that small hinges swing big doors. All right, so can we give a round of applause for these wonderful women here? Thank you all so much for doing this panel. And so you all will have a chance to connect with them and ask questions during the break time. So now back to Ariette. She has some exciting news for you guys.
Well, thank you, Estera, and thank you to the panelists for such an amazing discussion. I think that they deserve another round of applause, so please. I definitely had a lot of takeaways, and I think I'm ready to go find a place where I can change the TV channel. So now we're going to take a 30-minute break, and it'll be a coffee and networking break, and we will come back here at 11:30 for a Women's Voice Storytelling Workshop. So please go and enjoy some coffee, and we will see you back here at 11:30.
You don't want to miss this workshop.